Welcome in to the Week 10 edition of Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5. I'm Conrad Van Order, Damian Mitchell here beside me, Molly Robinson holding things down for us as she does each and every week. Appreciate you tuning in for another week here. And we got a bye week for Alabama this week, Damian, but Auburn coming off their first SEC win of the year. Can they build on that momentum? We have some, I would say, interesting potential trap games in the SEC that we're going to get to on this week's show. But before we do that, we have to remind you about our good friends at Dread River Distilling Company. You can find some of their fine products here in front of us. They are located at 2400 7th Avenue South there in downtown Birmingham. And they have not only a full-service bar, also a full-service restaurant as well there. A lot of wonderful options for you to select from, burgers, quesadillas, wings, essentially anything that you could want, they'll have it for you there. Also have a lot of great event spaces. And another thing is, while we have these four different liquors up there as well, one thing that they did want us to remind everybody about is their sherry finished rye, which we don't have up here with us actually, but it's actually the most awarded liquor that they have there at Dread River. It's won a gold medal in the Bartender Spirit Awards, a gold medal in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, a gold medal in the South's Best competition, and a double gold medal from the Enthusiast as well. It is available at your local ABC and package stores as well. So go in, stop by, ask for the sherry finished rye or any of their other options from Dread River. And if they don't have it in stock for you there, they will start carrying it. So go ask about our friends at Dread River. Go visit them again downtown in Birmingham and appreciate all that they do for us here on Countdown to Kickoff. All right, let's get started with this Week 10 edition of the show, Damian. We've got Auburn heading back home to Jordan-Hare. Been a while since they've been in the friendly confines there on the plains, but now they get a Vanderbilt team coming off a very competitive matchup against Texas, not able to pull it off, but Vanderbilt, a 3-point loss to Texas. So very much still, anybody that thought maybe this Vanderbilt team was a fluke or what happened against Alabama earlier in the year was a fluke, they have clearly shown that is not the case. And now a very interesting opportunity not only for Auburn, where they are looking to get back into contention for bowl eligibility as well as just building momentum off of their first SEC win last week. But if you're Vanderbilt, Damian, you get a win in this game, you are bowl eligible. You'll be at 6-3, but Diego Pavia a little banged up, so maybe that gives you some concern for the Commodores. So just right off the top, Damian, how do you see this matchup playing out on the Auburn side of things? And specifically, do you think we're going to see a continuation of what we got last week where you had Jarquez Hunter running for almost 300 yards?
I think so. And I think that's what Auburn's best recipe is offensively. You took the decision making out of Peyton Thorne's hands, and you truly believe that, all right, if they're going to give us this look in the front seven, we need to make sure 27 is good to go. And you see what happens when he has more than 20 carries in a ball game, and to the tune of, again, Kentucky wasn't a bad front coming in. Mm-hmm. They had some leaks the past couple weeks. But I think for Auburn, if you just almost copy and paste your game plan from last week, you're going to give yourself a fighting chance against Vanderbilt. And I think for Vanderbilt right now, they're going to feel some pressure. It's one of the few times this season where Vanderbilt's under a little bit of pressure because you don't want to fizzle out all the success that you've had in the middle part of the season and what you've been able to accomplish so far. I still think what Clark Lee has done for that program in the past couple seasons, and especially this year, they've been able to overcome a lot of adversity, a lot of hurdles to having a competitive team there in Nashville. And I think for Auburn on the defensive side too, one, I will say this. You went against a terrible offense against Kentucky. You kind of just take that for what it is. You know you have to be on your P's and Q's against Vanderbilt because, one, your possessions are going to be limited because they're going to try to run the ball. And, I mean, with Diego Pavia being a little banged up, does that make the running back? Does that increase the carries? Do they actually decide to keep him in the pocket and not make him run as much as he has been? But I think what you saw in Auburn's secondary, a lot of the younger guys start to step up. And we say it week in and week out, nobody on Vanderbilt's offensive line is ready to see Keldrick Falk all game. And I think that's where you're going to have your bread buttered if you're DJ Durkin, is just letting these guys play loose and play free. And I think you saw a little bit of that in Kentucky, and it felt like the momentum was starting to roll. Yes, you started off slow, but it started to snowball towards the middle part of the third quarter all the way to the fourth, where it felt like Auburn was in control. And I think if you can jump on Vanderbilt early and make them feel a lot more of that pressure, it takes the load off of everybody else. And not just take your foot off the gas, but you don't have to be as aggressive if you're looking to throw the ball and things like that, because the run game is starting to open up for you.
Absolutely. I mean, last week for Auburn, I mean, it was like they were living in color for the first time this season, just feeling like they had the entire offense available to them. And a lot of that came off of what Jarquez did. And I think going into this game, just the way I see it, I think you have a team in Auburn that's going to want to double down on that and continue trying to run the ball effectively. But I think for Vanderbilt, you're maybe doing the opposite, right? You're trying to get Diego Pavia in some of these short and intermediate passing game situations that we've seen, going back to the Alabama game, that he was so excellent operating in that, and really just being able to maneuver around the pocket, break out of the pocket, and extend plays, and just pretty much allow, it's almost like backyard football sometimes when you're watching them play with just his style. And I think if you're Auburn, that's got to be something that you really try. You got to try to contain that. And part of that goes to him being a little banged up coming off of the Texas game. And so that's my biggest question really for this game, is how much do his injuries affect his ability to play the style of football that we've gotten accustomed to seeing him play? Because if he's not able to be the Diego Pavia that we saw last year at New Mexico State, or for the first 8 games of this season at Vanderbilt, I'll be honest, I just don't think Vanderbilt is going to find a way. I don't think they're really going to beat anybody left on their schedule if they don't have him playing to the highest of his abilities. And so that's going to be a big factor. And you wonder if that's something where, does Auburn get maybe a little more aggressive on the defensive side of things? You try to put more pressure on him early. Maybe you're trying to get a couple of quarterback hits on him, kind of send a message and let him know, like, all right, we're coming for you. So, just kind of, have them just think for an extra split second, because that can make all the difference in a game like this. But it's also, the narrative of a revenge game, right? Because this is a spot that Hugh Freeze has struggled in now for 2 years in a row. Of course, I just mentioned, we all remember what happened when New Mexico State came into Jordan-Hare last year and pulled off that upset 31-10. Then you go back 2 years ago to a New Mexico State team that went and beat Liberty, that was then coached by Hugh Freeze. So this would be 3 years in a row that Diego Pavia would potentially be able to take down Hugh Freeze. You also throw Jerry Kill into the mix, who came over from New Mexico State alongside him, is now a member of that coaching staff there in Vanderbilt. So you wonder if is there any bit of that mental game maybe that's going on with Hugh Freeze specifically we heard him at his press conference on Monday, like, I don't want to see this kid again. And I completely understand that. I think there's a lot of people in the SEC that are glad that this is the only year they're going to have to face him. But it's going to be really interesting down there on the Plains. This is such a big opportunity for Auburn to prove that, again, the Missouri game, that was a disappointment. But to be able to brush that off and look as good as you did in the last 52 minutes or so of the game against Kentucky, you look at what's ahead for Auburn, and you have Louisiana Monroe, and then you have Texas A&M, and then you have Alabama. You're going to have to get 2 out of those games if you want to have a shot at getting to bowl eligibility, if you're able to win this one. So this would be a good step in the right direction, I think, for Auburn and Hugh Freeze, just getting some confidence and some goodwill back in the fan base.
And that's what they need at this point, because you go back and talk to a couple Auburn fans before Kentucky, they were getting ready for basketball season. They're already mentally checked out.
What a difference a week makes.
I'm telling you. And now the confidence that Auburn has, it's okay, if we can stack this win against Kentucky, you put on a good show against Vanderbilt, I can understand where the confidence comes from. And I think for Vanderbilt, especially if Diego Pavia isn't at 100%, it's going to be difficult to truly find the mismatches, because I think what he does with his legs is very effective. They like to move the pocket. They like to roll out. They're not just going to put him, standing up tall in the pocket for a lot of his throws. But I think that's where you have the advantage, because I think Auburn's defensive speed collectively can kind of counteract some of that stuff. If you're giving the quarterback contained, you're not trying to, you're limiting how many possessions that they have anyway. And if he's getting out there on the edge, and the edge guys, they're probably going to be playing their absolute tail off, so trying to contain Diego Pavia when he rolls out of the pocket. But I do think that for Auburn, you stick to what got you there this past week. If you look at Jarquez Hunter, I'm probably looking at Hugh Freeze this week as like, hey, big dog, take the load off him at practice this week, because he's going to get his fair share on Saturday. So you want to make sure his legs are up under him. And I think that's what this offense needs to be. And if the first time for a while, the offensive line looked dominant. And I think that's what you're going to have to show against a Vanderbilt team who's very scrappy. They're fast around the defensive side as well. But I think you have the advantage if you can control the line of scrimmage, and that's on both sides of the ball. And I think Auburn, they're setting up right now. Again, what we saw against Kentucky, there's a little bit of confidence there. It's just, can you do that again? And I think Auburn can.
Yeah, and I mean, last thing for Auburn for me is just, as we've seen now, and when Vanderbilt played and knocked off Alabama, when they played Texas and made it a very competitive game there up until the very end, is if you're Auburn, and I know this is easier said than done, and we say this almost every week, but you look at those games, first off, in both the Alabama and the Texas games, you had deflected passes that were ended up being intercepted. In the Alabama game, it went for a pick six. It didn't in the Texas game. But you see similarities there. You had Texas that was getting penalized a lot, putting themselves in disadvantageous situations there on 3rd and long. Alabama not able to get off the field defensively.
Yep.
So we have seen, while Vanderbilt has been impressive and they did knock off Alabama and they did play Texas very close, we've also seen in those games they kind of need the other team to shoot themselves in the foot a little bit. And credit to Vanderbilt for taking advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. But if you're Auburn, you are the more talented team on paper. You are at home. You have a little bit of momentum on your side now. Go out there, handle your business against Vanderbilt, and on top of potentially, getting closer to being bowl eligible, you can also make fun of Alabama fans for the rest of the year because by the transitive property, Auburn would be better than Alabama, right? Because they were able to beat Vanderbilt and Alabama was not. So that's going to be an exciting one coming up this weekend there from Jordan-Hare Stadium as the Vanderbilt Commodores coming down to the Plains to take on Auburn. That game will kick at 11:45 Saturday morning on the SEC Network. But we have a full slate here in the SEC, so we have some other matchups to get to, including Ole Miss at Arkansas. Could Ole Miss be on upset watch? We got a lot more SEC matchups to get to, so stay locked right here. You're listening to Countdown to Kickoff on Jocks 94.5.
Welcome back into Jocks Countdown to Kickoff. Damian Mitchell alongside Conrad Van Order and Molly Robinson holding things down. We are here on Jocks 94.5, presented by our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. You can find them 2400 7th Avenue South. I was just there last week, had a wonderful time. Of course, I'm telling you, the Birmingham Fog, it is the go-to old-fashioned. If you like your old-fashioned smoked with a little sweet taste at the end, I'm telling you, need to order that, and a bevy of options, as you can tell here on the screen. But also, when you get there, they have it all there for you. Service on tap. You heard us talk to the guys last week, and they take pride in it. They have a lot of fun making these wonderful spirits and beverages. And again, if you can't find them there in the store, go to your ABC store. Everything will be there. And tell me that your friends from Jocks Countdown to Kickoff sent you there to Dread River Distilling Company. Of course, we have some games on the weekend we got to talk about. Ole Miss travels to Fayetteville to take on the Arkansas Razorbacks. That game at 11 o'clock on ESPN. And it's kind of yin and yang. We saw Ole Miss come out of the gate pretty strong against Oklahoma. It kind of stalled for a little bit, but I think that it's more of a testament to where Oklahoma is defensively, because they've been fighting their tails off week in and week out. It's just the offense still isn't there. But Ole Miss still ended up getting that victory there at home against Oklahoma 26-14. And now this Arkansas unit, who we've seen the peak at times of how dominant they really can be. And then we've seen some lulls over the couple weeks. But when you go back and watch that LSU game, it never really felt like Taylor Green was comfortable. They didn't have any identity in the run game, which was surprising, especially what LSU didn't do against Texas A&M. But I think these two matchups, it kind of, if Ole Miss doesn't play their A-plus game, they can be beaten. And I think Arkansas, for them, is not turning the ball over. That is the only issue I can really find with this Arkansas unit week in and week out. It's for every great play we see from Taylor Green, there's a couple of just, man, you cannot do that, because we know how dynamic he is with his legs. It's sometimes the arm and the brain are just, they're not there at the same time. And I think, Jaquindon Jackson has been banged up a few weeks, but he looks like he's going to be trending towards playing this weekend. But I think for Arkansas, what you do defensively can really neutralize what Ole Miss does offensively. And I think Ole Miss, you're going to have to play with pace. You're going to have to keep that defense running, because I go back and I watched that Tennessee game against Arkansas, and it seemed like Travis Williams had all his guys locked in on, okay, this is what we're going to do. And Jackson Dart, for everything that he does play like and I don't mean this in a bad way, but he plays like he knows too much of the offense. Like he kind of goes out there very lackadaisical in certain situations where it's like, hey, we need you to ramp this thing up because you're the engine of this thing. You make this offense go. And I do think not having Trey Harris out there throws a wrench into this receiving room. I mean, you look at last week, the tight end Pierce Gordon was the leading receiver. So I think for Arkansas, it's how can you neutralize the big explosives and to make Ole Miss play a full 4 quarters of a fist fight, and are they made for it?
Yeah, I think this is I think you're going to see a lot of people that are on Arkansas in this matchup, at the very least to cover, and a lot of people are going to have them winning outright, I think. And a big part of that is what you said with Trey Harris and, his absence for Ole Miss, but also just how they've looked offensively in SEC play. It's just been a big juxtaposition to where they were the first, 3-4 games of the season when, to be fair, they're not really playing anybody. They're playing Furman and Wake Forest and teams like that, and nothing against them, but it's a little bit different than the SEC. And so now we've seen them struggle at times offensively. So I look for them defensively. Are you going to be able to make Taylon Green uncomfortable? Because as we've seen at times this year, he can be a spectacular player.
Yes.
As he was last week. He can be a horrible player, as we saw against UAB, for example. Granted, they still won that game, but what kind of Taylon Green are we going to get, and how is Ole Miss going to be able to disrupt what he does offensively speaking? And, I mean, you look at Arkansas and what they do defensively, they've been, I would say solid is a good way to describe them defensively this year, but they're giving up the 4th most passing yards per game in the conference. So is this the chance for Jackson Dart to finally maybe get some momentum, even though Trey Harris is out? Maybe a little bit of a sidebar here. The fact that Juice Wells has been such a non-factor in the Ole Miss offense,
it's puzzling,
is shocking to me, because I thought that was one of those guys where if you looked at what you had with Harris, Juice Wells, Prescorn at tight end, then you've got Parrish and Bentley, and that's kind of a whole nother situation there with Ulysses Bentley. And you looked at these pieces and you went, man, the sky is truly the limit for this offense. And while Trey Harris has been incredible, they haven't been bad running the football. Prescorn, as you said, was leading receiver last week. He's been good for them as well, but there just really hasn't been that other guy outside of Trey Harris that's really kind of separated himself in that wide receiver room. And Juice Wells coming over from South Carolina, I thought would be that guy. So maybe this is the week where you see that be a focal point of the offense, because again, this would be one of the better opportunities you have if you're Jackson Dart to finally get into a rhythm throwing the football, because again, he hasn't been bad, but when you compare him to, let's say, what he was doing last year in this Lane Kiffin offense, there's a notable drop-off.
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of why Ole Miss currently sits where they are, with a lot of chaos needed for them to find their way back into the college football playoff conversation. But, you just look at this matchup in Fayetteville. 4 of the last 5 games between these two teams in Arkansas has won outright.
Yep.
And this has just always been a tricky place for Ole Miss to go on the road and visit. Honestly, all time, Arkansas leads the series 37 wins, 29 losses, and 1 tie.
Oh, wow.
Between the two. So Arkansas actually has the advantage historically in this one. And as I just said, 4 of the last 5 in Arkansas have gone to the Razorbacks. So it makes sense when you break it down why a lot of people are on Arkansas to be able to pull off yet another upset like they did against Tennessee earlier in the year. It just, for me, there's so much of it that goes into the quarterbacks. I know that's every matchup, but are we getting the best versions of these two quarterbacks or not? Because if that's the case, this could be an excellent football game in terms of, we might be looking at a 45-42, like a shootout kind of thing, that 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning, I'm all for that.
We'll take it.
I am all for that. But for for Ole Miss, this is, I mean, if you lose this game, I think you're hitting the red button, right? Like you're in full on panic mode. The playoff that's not even a thought anymore. And you kind of look around and go, man, if this was supposed to be the best team on paper, potentially in the history of Ole Miss football, and we're going 9-3 and we're losing to Arkansas and Kentucky, I think there's going to be a lot of questions for Lane Kiffin to figure out moving forward, because again, with the way he rebuilds his rosters, a lot of these guys are, whether it's through the NFL or through the portal themselves, you have to imagine there's going to be a lot of turnover there. However, for Arkansas, I mean, talk about just, I don't want to call it a miracle season for Sam Pittman, because they are 5-3, but they have exceeded all of my wildest expectations for them. And I think a win here puts him firmly Sam Pittman in the conversation with the Mike Elkos and Clark Lees of the world when we talk about who's been the best coach in the conference this year.
Yeah, and when you look at just how Arkansas has been in the preseason, it was even difficult to even have expectations for him because we genuinely did not know what it was going to look like. You bring Bobby Petrino back for, I guess you'd say, the circle back situation of him having that offense. And we didn't know what Taylor Green was going to look like. We kind of had a feeling it was, okay, well, if he uses his legs, he could be dynamic. Then you watch the first game, it's, oh, he has a little bit more juice than even I thought. So now when we're watching Arkansas, it's almost each week they have just like this canvas of, all right, what game are you going to paint for us today? Because if you play like you're supposed to, you're one of the best teams in the conference right now. And like you made mention to the UAB game, it's, wow, y'all struggle with a 1-win UAB team. But then you go out and beat, a top ranked Tennessee team. So it's what Arkansas shows up against this Ole Miss team. Because one, I will say, Ole Miss's defense, they've made some bounds from what we're used to seeing with Lane Kiffin and on the offensive side. To me,
they are giving up the least points per game in the SEC right now.
See,
Ole Miss,
and I never thought we'd have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But with the transfers that they've brought in and some of the playmakers that they have on the defensive side of the ball, this team, like you said, on paper, it's supposed to work. And then when we've seen them on certain Saturdays, it's what's going on. And I mean, if you're Lane Kiffin, you're probably looking at yourself as the anti-hero in a lot of this stuff because of the fact that, I've been so focused on the offensive side of the ball that my defense, I've kind of, Pete Golden's got it. But then when the defense is starting to make plays, it's, okay, why is the offense sputtering? This is the side of the ball we're supposed to be excellent on. And to your point about having Juice Wells there, I thought instantly, as soon as he got to that offense, it's, okay, if Trey Harris is 1A, Juice is going to be 1B. And it hasn't been like that. It feels as though when Jackson Dart doesn't have Trey Harris out there, everybody else is like, okay, what are we supposed to do?
I was about to say, there's times where you just kind of look at whether it's Lane or Jackson Dart and you just kind of go, all right, you just need to calm down and get back to what's worked for you because we have such a track record of them having so much success together there at Ole Miss. So it will be a big one this weekend for not only the future of Lane Kiffin, the potential of Ole Miss maybe getting back in the playoff conversation, and Arkansas, can they get another big ranked win in the SEC under Sam Pittman, and a guy that a lot of people thought would be fired either by this point in the season, if not at the very end of the season. So we have more games to get to. Of course, we have that game going on in Jacksonville between the Florida Gators and Georgia Bulldogs, also Texas A&M, South Carolina, and others. So we continue here on the Week 10 edition of Countdown to Kickoff when we return on Jocks 94.5. Welcome back in to the Week 10 edition of Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5. Conrad, Damian, Molly with you here for a few more moments as we continue wrapping up and discussing some of the SEC matchups coming your way this weekend. But before we do that, let us tell you about our friends there at Dread River Distilling Company. We wouldn't be here without them. We appreciate all that they've done to support the show here on Jocks 94.5, as well as letting us come over there, giving us a personal tour, getting to meet the whole staff there. If you watched our show last week, you got to watch as we met with a couple members of the staff and had them kind of break down what the day-to-day life is like there at Dread River, because some of their backgrounds and what makes it such a unique place. But, of course, you have some of their fine liquor selections here in front of you. If the bourbon, you got the blue agave. I know we got the whiskey. If any of these don't suit your fancy, they have a number of other options. If you go to the ABC store, local package store, just ask what they have from Dread River, and they will get you taken care of there. They also have specials all throughout the week, whether you want to join them for happy hour, weekdays throughout the week. Their whiskey specials on Wednesdays. They have steak specials on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And of course, they have their classically trained Chef Kane there in the kitchen, who served us up some delicious food when we visited them. So go visit our friends at Dread River downtown in Birmingham, 2400 7th Avenue South. All right, getting into some of the other SEC games we have coming up this weekend, Damian. We have the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, if people are still calling it that.
They still call it that?
I don't know, but I like to call it that. As Florida and Georgia will be doing battle down in Jacksonville, Florida. We actually found out earlier this week that it looks like moving forward, because they're renovating the stadium there in Jacksonville, that you're going to have, I believe next year you're going to be in Mercedes-Benz there in Atlanta. The following year, they're going to be playing at Raymond James, where the Buccaneers play in Tampa Bay.
Yep.
And then ultimately, so 2 years from now, or 3 years actually, they will be returning to Jacksonville for the newly renovated stadium there. But this is a matchup for Georgia where they are riding high right now, Damian, and Florida, while props to them. They gave Tennessee a good fight a few weeks ago. Looked like they had something going there. But ultimately, dismantling Kentucky is what they had to settle for the next week, coming off of a bye. Now you have a Georgia team that looks like the class of the SEC at this point in the season. And again, it's a rivalry game, so some things you can kind of, throw out the window and just, crazy things happen in these kinds of situations. But Georgia is a significantly better team than Florida right now. And they play the games. There's a reason that they play the games. You have to feel confident, I guess maybe more confident about Florida and the direction they're heading right now with DJ Lagway. Unfortunately, Graham Mertz getting hurt a few weeks ago. So now you're rolling with DJ Lagway, the true freshman at quarterback. You have Ball, the true freshman running back, who's been really electric for them. So a little bit of juice here down the stretch potentially for Florida as they enter the ugliest part of a very difficult schedule where they're going to face nobody but ranked opponents until the final game when they get reprieve against Florida State.
Oh, boy.
But I just, for this game, Damian, what does Florida need to do, or what needs to happen in your mind for Florida to realistically have a chance of pulling off the upset?
It's easier said than done, but can you make DJ Lagway comfortable in the offense? Because the talent is there, but it felt like when he was going back and forth with Graham Mertz, you kind of just felt like the offense coordinator was kind of pulling an invisible string of just, we can't really let him loose right now. But now he's your only option. So there's got to be a way to, if you have to move the pocket a little bit, because I'm telling you, when we watched Georgia versus Texas and some of the things that Kirby Smart was doing defensively, it had Quinn Ewers looking lost. Arch Manning came in for a few snaps, and he was like, oh, my gosh, that's not Mississippi State across the board anymore. No. And I think for DJ Lagway, yes, you're a freshman. You're very talented. But, man, it's going to be tough. So I'm thinking – either you let the offense just fly and say, hey, you know what? We're throwing everything we got at them, because that's really what it's going to take. Because Georgia, at the way that they're playing right now, since that Alabama loss, they're starting to reel. It seems like they're starting to figure some things out. And I think defensively, if you can limit the big plays from Carson Beck and those receivers, I think you're strong enough in the defensive front to kind of contain their run game, because Georgia hasn't leaned on that for a couple weeks this year. And I think that's kind of the uniqueness of this Georgia offense is they're actually more pass happy than a lot of other teams have been, because you have Carson Beck, but they're almost settling and saying, like, we'll get a few yards in the cloud of dust and we'll see where it goes from there. But I think for Florida, one, you're going to have to limit those possessions. You're going to have to chew the clock and try to keep that offense at bay. But also you're going against a Kirby Smart defense, and you're looking at an uphill battle. But I think if you can get DJ Lagway a set of plays that are comfortable, if you have to utilize his legs a little bit more to just at least keep those defensive guys honest when he breaks the pocket, that's going to be your best recipe. And I think for Billy Napier, like you said, going into this month of November, even if you just look like you have a pulse this week against Georgia, I'm not going to count it as a win. And I really don't like the moral victory things, but you're going to feel a little bit better when you get into this backstretch.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that, if you're Florida, like you were saying, you kind of just have to hope that DJ Lagway has the best game of his life, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what it's going to come down to, because I think on the other side, if you're Georgia, you maybe feel like, again, easier said than done, but I think the game plan is probably pretty simple, right? Make him uncomfortable. He's a true freshman.
Yep.
You're the Georgia defense. it kind of, writes itself right there, right? And so if you're Georgia, you have to imagine that you're just going to try to pressure him as much as possible. On the flip side, if you're Florida, as we've seen with Carson Beck this year, he's been a little turnover happy ever since the Alabama game. And when you get pressure on him, it forces him to make bad decisions. And so if you're Florida, that's where you want to live and die. I think as you want to be aggressive, that might mean you're giving up some explosives here and there, but it's Georgia, right? They're going to score points. It's just a matter of, are you going to be able to get a couple of turnovers and potentially win the turnover battle? Because that, again, is going to be something that if that doesn't happen, I just don't really see a clear path to victory for the Gators in this one. You do have both teams coming off of a bye. Both teams are, needed to get rested up. We know Georgia's been dealing with some big time injuries. It looks like Tate Ratledge is going to be back, who is arguably the best offensive lineman in the entire country. It looks like he's going to come back, but you do have a couple of safeties who are going to miss the first half of the game on the Georgia side because of targeting calls back against Texas 2 weeks ago. So maybe that's an opportunity early in the game. You can air it out a little bit, maybe try to take advantage of some guys that are getting more snaps than they're used to. And you just really hope that, again, DJ Lagway's comfortable and he goes out there and looks like the 5-star freshman recruit that you signed him to be, quite frankly. So that one's going to be very, very tough, but should be an exciting game nonetheless down there in Jacksonville. Another game I wanted to touch on briefly is Texas A&M and South Carolina. So that game is going to be taking place at Williams-Brice Stadium there in South Carolina. Texas A&M on the road, a slight favorite, but I think Texas A&M has been probably the biggest surprise in the SEC so far. They're a top 10 team now, but South Carolina they've been tricky. I'll just put it that way. And defensively speaking, at least with Kennard and Dylan Stewart and some of those guys up front, they can cause some problems for Texas A&M. So do you see this one? Is it really as simple as A&M's just the better team and you expect them to handle business? Or do you think this is a very real trap game for the Aggies?
I think it could be a trap game, but there's almost a point where South Carolina has to almost play perfect for it to truly be that. Because I do think what you got with Kennard and Stewart, they're going to be a problem. That's going to be an issue. But I think if you have Marcel Reed able to use his legs, that's going to slow up that pass rush a good bit. Because if he puts the ball in his hands, we saw against LSU that he's got some real juice. But I mean, if you're South Carolina, you're kind of playing with house money. You kind of just looking at Texas A&M as, well, you're only a 2-point favorite. Not that they really care about the gambling side of things, but okay, who's afraid of little old me? Like we're just South Carolina. We ain't been doing too much except keeping things light with the Alabamas of the world. We embarrassed Kentucky, so it's okay. Well, we're kind of in no man's land. We can't really lose too much. We win. It feels pretty good. But I think if you're Shane Beamer, you're going to get some freaky special teams play on a random fourth down in the third quarter where that could be the momentum that you need for that offense to go out there and put up points. But I think Lenore Sellers, the passes that he's going to make, he's going to have to hit them. And that's kind of been their Achilles heel for the most part. But I do think with Rocket Sanders and what they're able to do in the ground game, it could be interesting. But Texas A&M, don't get caught reading the press clippings, because I think Mike Elko has this team in a very, very good spot moving for the back half of this season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. If you're Texas A&M, you control your own destiny right now. You have South Carolina and Auburn left in conference. You get through those, and you set up the big one at the end of the year in the rivalry game against Texas. So that should be an interesting one. I know a lot of people siding with South Carolina, maybe leaning towards them winning outright there this weekend. So that'll be a very interesting one to see how it plays out as well. But we do have a couple of other games to get to. Of course, the big one, want to talk a little bit about Ohio State and Penn State, a top 5 matchup there in the Big Ten. So we will do that when we return and wrap it up here on Countdown to Kickoff. You're listening to Jocks 94.5.
Welcome back into Jocks 94.5, Countdown to Kickoff. Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order, and Molly Robinson here with you for a few more moments. Of course, we're brought to you by our friends at Trev River Distilling Company. You've got to get down there. Again, these wonderful spirits. I can't wait to crack the bottle open, and when we do, we will have a good time because we tried them. And if I had to pick, go to the Blue Agave. That's the shot that you want. Just if you just want to taste it for a little bit, that's the one you go to. If you like tequila
or the jalapeno mention,
yeah, that too.
That's good too.
Yeah, and
just
listen,
saying,
anything they have there is going to be pretty good. If you could ask for the Birmingham Fog, make sure you tell them that Damien and Conrad put you on that one. It's a nice smoked, old fashioned. You feel fancy. You almost like you're on the Young and the Restless, and you just feel like, yes, this is exactly what I would. You almost got to put a suit on just to drink the drink. But it's a great time there, located 2400 7th Avenue South in downtown Birmingham. Before we get you out of here, we're going to the Big Ten. They're traveling up north. Big time matchup with Ohio State and Penn State. It's almost a de facto elimination game if you're Ohio State, because you have one loss. Again, it's against the number 1 team in the country in Oregon a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're Penn State, it's, okay, we're trying to tell y'all we belong here. We're here. We've been doing this for a long time, and now there's actual expectations of them truly being in the college football playoff. but you got to be able to get over that Ohio State hump, which James Franklin hasn't done often since he's been up there in Pennsylvania. But I think that for Ohio State and Ryan Day, you knew you were going into this season with a lot of pressure. Now that the season is here, you've constructed literally the best roster money could buy, and yet you still find yourself in the same boat you were in last year of, man, how does this loss happen? How do you go up there and lose to Oregon? And now you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball against a top-ranked team in Penn State, who at moments has looked pretty good. At moments it's, okay, this is the James Franklin Penn State team we're used to. But either way it goes, at 11 o'clock on Fox, it's going down between Ohio State and Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, this is, as you said, potentially a elimination game for Ohio State, which is crazy to think about just with how stacked they look coming into the year. And granted, you know, I think they would still have a decent chance to get in, just because if your losses are to the number 1 and what would at that time be the number 3 teams in the country, you're going to get some wiggle room. But you absolutely would have to put up an impressive performance against Indiana later in the year to have a ranked win under your belt and show that you have something, you know, worth something on your resume other than just good losses. But my concern with Ohio State, and I know Molly was, you know, absolutely loving the game against Nebraska last weekend, and you know, it looked like Nebraska might be able to close it out, and you know, they ultimately fall just a little short, but they were able to give Ohio State fits, offensively speaking, and now you're going up against a defense that, statistically speaking at least, is better across the board than Nebraska was. And Nebraska has a very good defense, but Penn State has an elite defense that I would say. And I think you have somebody that, again, is a little more experienced at quarterback in Drew Aller, somebody that has more experience playing in the Big Ten. You've seen this offense for Penn State have more juice this year than it has in years past under James Franklin. And it really feels like this is the opportunity, right? If you're Penn State, this is your chance to prove and finally get over this hurdle that has been Ohio State and Michigan, to be fair, in your own conference. Because regularly, I mean, you could pretty much write in pen at the beginning of the year, Penn State's going to go either 9-3 or 10-2. They're going to lose to Ohio State and Michigan, maybe one more, and they're going to finish somewhere in the top 15 or so teams in the country. This is your chance to buck that trend. This is your chance to prove that you're ready to play with the big boys. You're ready to take over, and a Michigan team that's not living up to expectations this year. If you win this one, an Ohio State team that's not living up to expectations this year, and you put yourself firmly up there with Oregon as the class of the Big Ten. And I'll tell you this right now, if Ohio State loses on Saturday, I'm not saying it will happen this next week, Ryan Day is fired, in my opinion. I think this would be it for him if you lose this game.
Yeah.
Granted, could you potentially get in the playoff still and win a national championship? Yes, there is a possibility of that happening, but anything short of that, if you lose this game, because now you haven't beaten Michigan 3 years in a row, now the one team you could beat regularly, you're losing to them when you just spent $20 million on your roster. Patience is going to be thin up there in Columbus, and I think that this could be the final nail in the coffin for Ryan Day, and I'm not, whether that's fair, whether that's right, whether that's wrong, whatever you want to call it, this is a big game for Ohio State to prove that, okay, we are still right up there with Oregon. That game was so close. We're still the class of the Big Ten alongside Oregon, and yeah, you cannot lose this game to Penn State, and but it's a battle of two coaches that don't like winning big games. So I feel like it's honestly just kind of a crapshoot when you look at what Ryan Day and James Franklin have both done in their careers against top 10 teams. It's not great, Damian, but somebody's got to win, right?
Yeah, and I think for Ohio State, you've got it. You have to win this one. And again, we talk about how this roster has built. You got Jeremiah Smith, who's a true freshman that many people may not know, but they're probably going to figure out on Saturday. And I don't think Penn State has a defensive back that can contain him for 4 quarters. But I do think that if you're Ohio State, you're under the pressure that you're under, but you have to win this ball game. And I do think going into it, you are the better team. It's just, can you prove it to Penn State that you are? And I think that I agree with you to the point that if Ryan Day does lose this game, I don't see how you continue to have him as your head coach, because, like you said, you already can't beat Michigan, and then the one team you got to beat, you fall to them. You're used to this. So, like, at some point, if that's where the program is starting to trend towards, Yeah, some changes are definitely on the horizon.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean Ryan Day's a bad coach. It's just the reality of, Ohio State is, like the Georgias and Alabamas of the world, right? The expectations are different.
Yeah.
And especially when you spend as much money on their roster as we know that they did, the expectations get even higher from there. So that's going to be a great game, the biggest game of the weekend, nationally speaking. Again, that is Ohio State taking on Penn State, a 3 versus 4 matchup. That will be an 11 a.m. kick on Fox. So get started bright and early. You can enjoy a little bit of that game, then turn on over to Auburn and Vanderbilt.
Yes, sir.
It's going to be a great day, not only in the SEC, but across the entire college football landscape. So we will be back next week for the Week 11 edition, Damian, of Countdown to Kickoff. The season seems to fly by, but next week, Alabama, LSU. Going to be a big one. Can't wait to break that one down for you, but appreciate you tuning in. Again, thanks to our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. Go visit them, 2400 7th Avenue South in Birmingham. For Damian Mitchell, Molly Robinson, I'm Conrad Van Order, and you've been listening to Countdown to